You think you know someone. You think you know yourself. But what happens when one night changes everything? My best friend and I had been close for years, inseparable. No secrets, no awkward moments, just us. But that night, alone in my room, something happened, something neither of us saw coming. And once that moment passed, there was no way to take it back. Was it a mistake, or was it something that had been waiting to happen all along? I'd always thought I knew Ran better than anyone. We had been best friends for years, through every high and low. Every dumb argument, every unforgettable adventure. There was never anything weird between us. Never a moment where I had to second-guess myself. Until that night. It started like any other. Just me and him hanging out in my room like we'd done 100 times before. Video games, some leftover pizza, a movie playing in the background that neither of us was really watching. Ran was lying on my bed, scrolling through his phone, while I sat on the floor, leaning against the side of the mattress. He stretched his arms above his head, letting out a deep sigh. "Dude, I'm so bored," he groaned, tossing his phone aside. I smirked. "We literally have a whole TV in front of us. You want to stare at the ceiling instead?" Ran turned his head, grinning lazily. "No, just thinking." That should have been my first clue. Ran never just thought about things unless something was on his mind. But I didn't question it. I figured he was just tired or maybe stressed about school. Then he did something he had never done before. He reached out and ran a hand through my hair, messing it up like he always did, but this time, it lingered a second too long. I froze. My stomach tightened, and it had nothing to do with nerves, nothing I wanted to acknowledge. "Your hair's getting long," he muttered, almost absent-mindedly. I forced a laugh, shoving his hand away. "Yeah, maybe I'll actually cut it this time." Ran chuckled, but something in his expression had changed. I didn't know what it was at first, but I felt it. The air in the room shifted, like a string being pulled too tight, just waiting to snap. I tried to ignore it. Grabbing the controller, I tossed it onto the bed next to him. "Wanna play one more round?" Ran didn't move. Instead, he propped himself up on one elbow, his gaze locked onto mine. And then he said it. "I think about you, sometimes." The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I swallowed hard. Okay, that's kind of vague, man." Ran let out a breathy chuckle, shaking his head. "No, I mean, like, in a way I probably shouldn't." My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to play it off, joke about it, turn it into nothing, pretend it didn't mean what I knew it did. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe, because I wasn't sure I wanted it to be a joke. I had spent years convincing myself that Ran was just my best friend, that whatever stray thoughts I'd buried deep down were meaningless, that there was nothing there. But now, sitting in the dim glow of my bedroom, his gaze holding mine in a way that made my skin burn, I wasn't so sure anymore. "Ran, I know," he interrupted, his voice quieter now. I couldn't not say it anymore." A pause, a deep, unbearable silence stretching between us, filled with everything. We had never said it before. I could have laughed it off, could have ignored it, pretended like nothing had changed. But something had changed. I wasn't sure who moved first. All I knew was that 1 second, there was space between us, safe, familiar space, and the next, there wasn't. I could feel the warmth of him, the way his breath hitched, the way his fingers curled slightly into the bedsheets, like he was stopping himself from doing something he wasn't sure he was allowed to do. I should have pulled away. I should have said something. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in, just enough to feel the heat radiating off him. Just enough to know that whatever happened next, there was no going back. The space between us didn't exist anymore. I could feel Ran's breath, shallow and unsteady, mixing with mine. His hand, the same one that had always given me playful shoves and high fives, now rested on the mattress between us. fingers twitching like he wanted to reach out but wasn't sure if he should. Neither of us spoke, neither of us moved. I should have said something. Instead, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't do. I leaned in. It was barely anything at first, a shift, a hesitation. But Rand didn't pull away. He didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned in too, his lips parting just slightly, like he was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. The moment our lips brushed, a sharp jolt ran down my spine. It wasn't like I had imagined, because, yeah, I'd imagined it before, even if I never let myself admit it. But this was softer, slower, real. Rand made a quiet noise in the back of his throat, just enough to send a shiver down my skin. His fingers finally moved, brushing against my jaw, tentative at first, then firmer, like he was grounding himself in the moment. I should have panicked, but I didn't. Instead, I tilted my head slightly, deepening the kiss just enough to feel the way he exhaled against me. The way his whole body melted into mine, like we had been waiting for this without knowing it. But then, suddenly, Rand pulled back. My heart lurched. He stared at me, eyes wide, lips slightly swollen. I could see the war happening behind those blue-green eyes. He muttered. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Rand. He shook his head. Then he stood up so fast the bed creaked beneath him. I need a second. My stomach twisted. Rand. Don't. But he was already moving toward the door. And then he was gone. I sat there, staring at the empty space where he had just been, my whole body still buzzing from the aftershock of what had just happened. I had kissed my best friend. And now, I wasn't sure if I had just ruined everything. Rand didn't text, didn't call, didn't even show up for our usual morning coffee stop before school. It was like he had vanished, like the past 5 years of friendship had been wiped clean the second our lips touched. And maybe that was what scared me the most. Not the kiss itself, not the fact that I had wanted it to happen, but the fact that he was running from it. By the time lunch rolled around, I had officially lost my patience. I found him outside, sitting on the edge of the school bleachers, hunched over like he was trying to make himself disappear. Hey, I said, my voice tight. Rand stiffened at the sound of my voice but didn't look up. I climbed the metal steps and sat down next to him, close enough that our arms almost touched, close enough that he knew he couldn't escape this conversation. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then he sighed. I messed up. My jaw clenched. We both did. He finally looked at me, eyes troubled. That's the thing. I don't know if it was a mistake or if it was just. I don't know. I swallowed hard. Rand. I panicked. He admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I wasn't expecting it. I mean, I was, but not really. And then when it actually happened, it felt too. I finished for him. Real. Rand exhaled, nodding. Yeah. Something inside me twisted. I could handle rejection. I could handle him telling me it didn't mean anything. But the way he was looking at me, like he was scared of what it did mean, was worse. You don't have to figure this out right now, I said, my voice softer. But don't shut me out. That's not fair. Rand swallowed, his knee bouncing up and down, a nervous habit I had memorized over the years. He was fighting something. I could see it, feel it, and then, finally, he let out a shaky breath and turned to me. I don't think I can go back to the way things were, he admitted, his voice raw. My stomach dropped. Rand. But he interrupted, gripping his jeans like he was anchoring himself. I don't think I want to either. His words knocked the air out of me. And before I could process them, he reached for my hand. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that screamed, look at me. I'm making a move, but in a way that was hesitant, careful, like he was giving me the choice to pull away. I didn't. I laced my fingers through his, holding tight, and this time, he didn't run. That night, Rand came over. No warning, no text, just a knock on my window at 10:37 p.m. I pushed the curtain aside. my heart pounding as I saw him standing there, hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, his face unreadable in the dim glow of the streetlight. I hesitated before unlocking the latch and sliding the window up. "You know I have a front door, right?" Ran huffed out a quiet laugh. "Old habits." I stepped back, letting him climb inside. He landed on the floor with a soft thud, standing there awkwardly for a second before exhaling and rubbing the back of his neck. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. I swallowed. "Me neither." Silence. He glanced at my bed, then back at me. "Can I stay?" I should have said no. I should have made him talk about what happened earlier, about the way he had held my hand like it meant something. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded. Ran didn't bother changing. Just kicked off his shoes and pulled his hoodie over his head before collapsing onto my bed like it was his own. And maybe that's why it felt so natural. Why it felt so right. Because Ran had always been there. Even now, I turned off the light and slid in beside him, keeping a careful distance between us. But the space between us felt unnatural, forced. Ran let out a quiet sigh. Then, after a long pause, he murmured, "You're thinking too loud." I smirked in the dark. "And you're stealing my bed." He chuckled, shifting onto his side to face me. "Alex." My breath hitched. He never said my name like that, slow, measured, like he was testing the weight of it. I turned my head toward him, barely able to make out his expression in the darkness. But I could feel it, the tension, the hesitation, the choice. And then, just like before, we were too close to ignore. His fingers brushed my arm, soft, uncertain. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Ran, I don't know what this means," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to pretend anymore." Something inside me cracked open. Because I didn't either. So instead of answering, I reached out, closing the last bit of space between us, and let my fingers trace over his wrist, up his arm, until they found his face. And this time, when our lips met, he didn't pull away, he leaned in. I woke up before Ran. The first thing I noticed was that we were still close, closer than we should have been. My arm was slung over his waist, his fingers loosely curled around my wrist. His breath was slow and steady against my shoulder, his face buried in the pillow. For a second, I let myself believe this was normal, that this was just another morning where Ran had crashed at my place after a late night. But then reality sank in. Last night happened. We kissed. We didn't stop ourselves this time. And now, with the morning light creeping through my window, I had no idea what came next. I barely had time to process before Ran shifted, mumbling something incoherent as he blinked awake. His eyes met mine. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then his gaze flickered down, to where my arm was still wrapped around him. And yet, this time, I wanted to dive in with him. I pulled away instinctively. "Sorry." He didn't let me. Ran caught my wrist before I could move too far. His grip firm but not forceful. His thumb brushed against my skin. Hesitant. "You're freaking out," he said quietly. I let out a short, nervous laugh. "Yeah, well, this is kind of a big deal. Don't you think?" Ran didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled and sat up, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I admitted. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Are you regretting it?" I didn't even have to think about it. "No." Ran nodded slowly, like he was trying to let that sink in. "Okay, that's good." I studied him. "Do you regret it?" His jaw tightened for half a second, and my stomach twisted. Then, "No," he murmured. The tension in my chest unraveled just a little. Ran sighed, falling back against the pillows. "This is weird." "Huh?" I smirked. "Just a little." A beat of silence. Then, almost hesitantly, Ran turned his head toward me, his voice softer now. "What if we don't overthink it? What if we just figure it out as we go?" My breath caught, because that was him. Always diving in without a plan. Always making impulsive decisions. Always pulling me into his chaos. And yet, this time, I didn't want to be careful either. So instead of answering, I leaned over, pressing my forehead against his. I whispered. Ran exhaled, his fingers grazing my arm. And just like that, we weren't running anymore. For the first time in days. Things felt okay. Ran and I didn't talk about what we were. Didn't try to slap a label on something we were still figuring out. But we didn't ignore it either. He didn't avoid me. He didn't run. And that was enough, until it wasn't. It happened 2 days later in the school parking lot. We had just finished practice, him for basketball, me for track, and we were leaning against his car, sipping from our water bottles like we always did before heading home. That's when I heard it. Damn, Hayes, didn't know you were playing for the other team. Ran froze. The voice came from across the lot, Tyler Davis, one of the seniors from his team, smirking as he slung his bag over his shoulder. I felt Ran stiffen beside me. I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. You got some new material, Tyler? That one's ancient. Tyler ignored me, his gaze locked onto Ran. So what is it, man? Just experimenting? Or is this like a thing now? I turned to Ran, waiting for him to shut it down, to roll his eyes like he usually did when people talked. But he didn't say anything. He just stood there, silent. And suddenly, the past few days, the mornings when he didn't let go of my hand right away, the nights when he leaned against me just a little longer than necessary, felt fragile. Breakable. Tyler scoffed. Whatever. Man, do what you want. He walked away, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Ran finally turned to me. His expression was unreadable, but I knew him well enough to see the storm brewing behind his eyes. Ran, I need a second, he muttered, pushing off the car. Panic flared in my chest. Don't do this, I said quickly. His jaw clenched. I'm not doing anything. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I just need to think. I took a step forward. Think about what? Whether this is worth it. Whether I'm worth it. Ran's eyes snapped to mine, wide with something that looked dangerously close to regret. And suddenly, I felt stupid for thinking this was easy. For thinking he wouldn't do exactly what I had been afraid of all along. For thinking he wouldn't run when it really mattered. I can't do this right now, he said, his voice tight. The words hit harder than they should have. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding stiffly. Got it. Ran hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. He just walked away. And for the first time since this all started, I let him. I hadn't talked to Ran since that night. Hadn't seen him. Hadn't heard from him. And maybe that was my answer. Maybe this wasn't worth the risk for him. Maybe I never had been. I was sitting in my room, staring at my phone like an idiot, when the knock came. Soft. Hesitant. I didn't move. Then, Alex, it's me. I exhaled sharply, running a hand over my face before forcing myself to open the door. Ran stood there, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was a mess. His hoodie wrinkled, but his eyes, his damn eyes, were clearer than I'd ever seen them. He didn't say anything at first. Then, I messed up, he admitted again. I folded my arms. Yeah, no kidding. He swallowed hard. It scared me, the way Tyler said it, like it was some kind of joke. Like I'm some kind of joke. I felt my chest tighten. And you think that's what this is? A joke? Ran shook his head. No, that's the problem. Silence. I stared at him, waiting for the part where he walked away again. But this time, he didn't. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care what they think. I care what you think. My heart stuttered. Ran exhaled. And I think I love you. The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. But I wasn't scared anymore. So I did the only thing I could. I pulled him inside, closed the door, and kissed him like we had all the time in the world. Because maybe, just maybe, we did. Sometimes, fear makes us run from the things we want the most. But love, Love is about the moments when we choose to stay. What would you have done in Alex's place? Would you have waited for Ran? Or walked away? Let's talk in the comments. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that will leave you breathless.